From the News Channel 5 Network, this is OpenLine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpenLine. Glad you're with us tonight. Tonight, we're talking all things politics. A chance for you to call in with your thoughts, questions, comments, even your concerns, if you want to call in with your concerns. But we're talking about the Supreme Court nomination. So that is going on up in Washington, D.C. You've seen a lot of that on TV. Certainly the war in Ukraine, sanctions against Russia, the midterm elections, if you want to go that far, we'll talk about it. And very happy to have with us Dr. John Vile, political science professor at MTSU, joining us via Zoom. And you said you have your Supreme Court tie on.
I do. I have a historic tie for just about every occasion.
Well, this is perfect. Your Supreme Court tie. And, of course, I love MTSU there in the background as you join us via Zoom.
Yes.
So thank you for coming on. And you've just written a new book about prayer in schools. Is that right?
Well, it's prayer in American public life. And one of the points is, that we often, the first thing we think about in prayer in schools is you can't pray in public schools. Although I always go with the notion that, as long as there are tests, there will be prayer, that there will be prayer in school. But what I'm trying to show is, no, under our Constitution, teachers can't prescribe what children, they can't write prayers and require them in public schools. But that doesn't stop politicians from mentioning prayer in inaugural addresses, from putting "In God We Trust" on coins, all kinds of displays in the broader culture that relate to, religion and politics. I did an earlier book on the Bible in American life and culture.
And you were on Issues of Faith for that. You were on the show. Yes. I do Issues of Faith. And I'm thinking maybe you should come on for prayer in schools. I mean, that's so fascinating to me, the evolution. Because we used to have prayer in schools, and then it became, all right, there needs to be this separation of church and state, and now we don't have prayer in schools. And I know it was a big deal, obviously. It's been very controversial at all points in that debate. Is that right?
Right. That's right. But again, what we don't have is we don't have publicly prescribed prayer in public schools. Doesn't stop someone from, bowing their head before lunch if they choose, or bringing a Bible to class, or that sort of thing. But in the broader culture, I was surprised. I mean, I'm doing another book right now on inaugural addresses, but how many inaugural addresses by presidents have a prayer in them? Dwight D. Eisenhower, when he was his first inaugural address, he actually asked the audience to bow, and he read a prayer that he had written the day before. And there are other, manifestations of that in American public life. So
we may talk more about that, because I'm very interested in that. I think that's fascinating. That's a great thing to kind of talk about and look back on. As you're a political scientist, but also a historian, so I like that. All right, and you write a lot of books. Good grief, you just wrote this other one. Man, good job. But all right, let's talk about this.
Twiddling,
Yeah, let's talk about the Supreme Court. So what do you think? You've been watching what's going on with these new hearings. What's your overall assessment? What do you think?
Here's what I think. I think that when you have a Democratic president, you're going to get someone, they're likely to nominate someone who leans to the left. And when you get a Republican president, you're likely to get one that leans to the right. And that's just a fact of politics. They were elected, they got in that position. I think what you have to look for is integrity, experience, competence. And in my judgment, Justice to be, I hope, Jackson has those qualities. I thought she went through some withering, really, questions that sometimes I thought were bordered on the inappropriate or the ridiculous. Seemed to keep pretty good cheer during most of this. She's very experienced. She's on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, which is a typical stepping stone. And of course, her appointment would be historic in that she would be the first African-American woman ever to serve. There have been two African-Americans on the court, Justice Thurgood Marshall, who was appointed by Lyndon Johnson, and of course, Clarence Thomas, who's there now. But she would be the first African-American woman. And I think she's highly qualified. And that's not to say that I would necessarily agree with what I think all her decisions will be. One of the fascinating things about her is that she has experience both as a defense attorney, which is very unusual in the court, and as a prosecuting attorney.
Right. And it looks like she has the votes now, because there are at least 3 Republicans. Is that right? 3
Yes.
Republicans have said they will support her.
Yes. Susan Collins of Maine, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Mitt Romney of Utah, and Joe Manchin. There was some discussion as to how he would vote. He's also, a Democrat who sometimes leans Republican. He's going to support her. So, absent some kind of bombshell, which seems very unlikely in her case, she will be confirmed. There's not too big a hurry because, as I understand it, Breyer is actually plans to sit out this session, which usually ends toward the end of June, and the new session doesn't begin till October. And in some ways, I think that's a good thing. Right now it looks like we could have, there are a couple of church-state issues that are very important. There are a couple of cases involving abortion rights, and it's probably better that she not go in and try to, issue a decision a month or 2 later. So Stephen Breyer, whom she served, by the way, as a clerk under many years ago, will be the one writing the decisions for, or it will be in that place until the end of this court session.
You said earlier, excuse me, that Republican presidents tend to nominate more conservative-leaning justices. Democratic presidents tend to nominate more left-leaning. And
Yes.
that makes sense. But when you look at history, I just wonder if it's always been so one side or the other. And I'm astounded that there are some judges, I can remember in my lifetime, where the judge is nominated by, let's say, a Republican president, and then turns out to be somewhat liberal. And so it seems like when you hear that, it seems astounding in these times that would happen, because you don't see that happening in the last few, presidencies.
You're reminding me of President Eisenhower was once asked if he had made any mistakes as president, and he said yes, and they're both sitting on the Supreme Court. One was, Chief Justice Warren, and the other was William Brennan, both of whom were far to the left of where Eisenhower would have been. But
and so how did that happen? Were they not looking at things the way they look at things now? How did that happen?
We were not as divided as a nation, ideologic. The partisan divide in Congress has gotten increasingly stronger over the last several years. So that's part of it. And part of it is, the issue that you nominate, this is what people always need to remember. We might think the big issue today is going to be X, and it'll turn out 3 years from now to be Y or ABC. And sometimes there's a consistency between them, and sometimes, even if you look at I would say particularly the Republican Party, the party of Trump was not, in my judgment, the party of Bush. There had been a major change there. So someone, you could be a Bush Republican and be very different than a Trump Republican would. And this, same thing can happen on the Democratic side as well.
Right. Yeah, so that's very interesting. That's very interesting about Eisenhower. Ask about his mistakes. They said they're both on the Supreme Court. You said there was some questioning that you felt was approaching the limits of what was maybe appropriate. I want to ask you about some questions that our Senator, Marsha Blackburn, asked. She said to the judge, "I can only wonder what your hidden agenda is. Is it to let violent criminals, cop killers, and child predators back on the streets?" What do you think about some of the things that our senator was asking?
I think it's inflammatory. I think it, riles up the base, and who among us would want a child predator, loose? But who among us would deny a person who might be falsely accused of child predation from having counsel? And our system, the system that we have of rights is not designed to protect criminals. It's designed to protect those of us who are not criminals who could be falsely accused.
The Judge Jackson, was at one time a public defender, right? She's one of the few that's ever been a public defender. And so
that's right.
That was where some of this criticism came from. And I think it was our Senator Blackburn who said you used your Harvard education to help set terrorists free and child predators free and that kind of thing.
Well, I suppose, people would prefer that they use, most people use their Harvard education to go work for Wall Street. And there's nothing wrong with that. But here's someone who's devoted her life to public service on both sides. I just think it's a fallacious kind of argument.
And what do you think? I wonder, so when the last Republican was Brett Kavanaugh, I don't know that there was a woman on that committee to question him. So Marsha Blackburn's new on there. She's kind of a new presence. And she seemed like she was really in attack dog mode. I mean, I wonder if she was trying to get certain Republican talking points out, and because she was a woman, she was more able to do that, with a woman nominee. I wonder how all that worked.
Perhaps. I mean, one of the most bizarre questions that I think has been asked, maybe people would differ with me, but at one of the senators asked her to define what a woman was. And there's a follow-up article in, I believe it's the Washington Post today, that says they've subsequently asked several senators to define a woman, and they haven't done very well at that. Their answers would exclude about half the people who claim to be women from being women. So, who knows?
It was Marsha Blackburn who asked that question. What is a woman? And the judge responded, "I'm not a biologist."
Right.
And then Marsha Blackburn said, if you can't answer that question, I don't think you can be a judge. So, yeah, what is a woman?
Right.
Was the question.
Well, again, the follow-up article suggests that the senators who've subsequently been asked to define a woman themselves have not had a very, one of them said, it's a rib from Adam's side, which I suppose is theologically accurate, but I'm not sure how you would ascertain in court whether someone was or was not a descendant from a rib from Adam's side. So it goes. And this has been played, let's be real clear about this, this has been played on the other side. When Robert Bork was nominated, and of course his nomination proved ultimately unsuccessful, but when he was nominated, if I recall, it was less than a day, it may have even been 2 or 3 hours, that Edward Kennedy got on the floor of the Senate and said, if Bork is confirmed, we're going to have back alley abortions. We're going to have, women are going to be barefoot and pregnant, and on and on and on. And, you could make some arguments as to whether he, which way he would have gone on abortion, but it was designed to incite. It wasn't designed to ask people cogently to think about, what were the policy positions.
And so as a historian, the historian part of you, are our Supreme Court nominations now, are they more partisan than ever? And is it more difficult? How have things progressed when you watch these confirmation hearings?
Well, the last several have been have been almost completely split along party lines. And of course, part of this occurred when, as you'll remember, with a year or so to go, Obama nominated Merrick Garland to be a justice, and that nomination was denied. The Republicans did not even give him a hearing because they were hoping correctly that they would get a Republican would be nominated. And as it turns out, Trump ended up with 3 different nominations. Well, the last nomination broke the rules that the Republicans had essentially established in denying Merrick Garland, because they said, well, there's only 3 months to go, but Trump is still president. He can nominate Amy Coney Barrett, and he did, and they got her through on a party line vote. And again, you got a 50-50 Senate, and only 3 Republicans, say that they're going to vote for one of the most historic nominations. I'd hate to be the person who said, we have a highly qualified African-American woman. She'd be a first, and I'm going to vote against her because, I think she might go against me in a case in the future. I'd hate to be on that side. But again, I think if you look at Barrett's confirmation, I'm fairly sure it was also a pretty strict party line vote.
Right.
There may have been one or two that strayed, but it was pretty much like that.
How likely do you think it is? This is a question she was asked about expanding the number of people on the court and trying to put more liberal-leaning judges on there. It was certainly something that was talked about in the campaign, the presidential campaign.
Yes.
Is that still out there? Do you think that's something that's possible?
It is out there. You know, Biden has been very, I would say, conservative on this issue. He did what you sometimes want to do when you want to postpone something that you think might be hastily thought out, and that is create a commission. And the commission had a lot of good ideas, but ultimately came down against expanding the court. The last time it happened, or the last time it was attempted seriously, was, you know, when trying to block the New Deal programs of Franklin D. Roosevelt. And there's been we've had 9 on the court now for, well, just after the end of the Civil War, about 1867 or thereabouts. I don't think that's the way to go, but it is a way of expressing sort of frustration. You think about it, Trump in 4 years got 3 nominees, and Biden, well, Jimmy Carter, take it to a famous example, got none. And you know, I think actually a better proposal, and I don't favor this for reasons that are fairly obscure to talk about here, but I think a better approach would be to say each justice has a 9 or an 18-year term, and you know, every 4 years you get basically 2 nominations once it goes into effect. But you know, Constitution is pretty difficult to change on these sort of things, and absent a sort of a landslide election where one party would, you know, gain firm enough control to be able to squeeze it through 2/3 of both houses of Congress and 3/4 of the states, I don't think it's likely to change. Now, let me add here, because I've confused the things just a bit. The number of justices is not actually established in the U.S. Constitution, so it would not require a constitutional amendment to do that. But people are, you know, even some people who would favor having a more liberal court might figure out that if you can increase the court to make it more liberal, the next administration can come along and increase it to make it more conservative. So it's, you know, it's a double-edged sword.
Right. As all these things are. That's fascinating.
Yes.
All right, well, that kind of sets the table for a Supreme Court discussion. If you want to call in, there's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. We'll also talk about the war in Ukraine, sanctions, even the midterm elections. Anything you want to talk about politics-wise. Take a break. Be back right after this.